Hello, I want a new needle book, so let's learn how to make one.
So a needle book is essentially a little book with some felt pieces on the inside where you can store all of your needles in. They are very, very handy, and I currently have two of them, but for some reason, I keep managing to lose one of them, and sometimes I lose both of them, so now I need a third needle book to make sure I always have a needle book so that when I lose them, I have a backup needle book. Now, this one was made on my embroidery machine with a design from Urban Threads, which is why it has a dragon on the front, which is super cool. And this one was just made out of plain old fabric. We're going to learn how to make one out of plain old fabric so that everyone can do this. Now, the felt on the inside is very easy to get. You just cut some felt and then stitch it down the middle. The slightly more difficult, but still very easy for beginners part, is this outside hard cover of the needle book. We need to make sure it has no raw edges around the outside, so it's going to have an inside layer of fabric and an outside layer of fabric, and I recommend putting some sort of interfacing or batting or something stiffener on this part to make sure that it's like a little bit more sturdy and substantial than just two layers of quilting cotton. Now, if I open this out and lay it flat, I can see that this needle book ends up with a finished measurement of approximately 7¼ inches by 4½ inches. So for ease of math, I'm going to need to add seam allowance to this. For ease of math, I'm going to have, I think, a ½ inch seam allowance all the way around. So 7 and a bit, I'm just going to round that down to 7. And then plus ½ inch seam allowance on this side, ½ inch on this side. That's going to end up being 8 inches. And for the vertical, for 4½, it's going to end up ½ inch on this side, ½ inch on this side is going to be 5½. So I'm going to cut out two squares that are 5½ by 8 inches. Now I'm going to use my quilting ruler as well as my cutting mat and my rotary cutter to cut this out without having to measure or draw anything, but you could also just draw on a piece of paper and then use it as a pattern piece and cut it out. So I've got my ruler lined up now at the 5½ edge of the fabric here and at 8 inches here. So now I just have to cut 1, 2, and I will already have my rectangle. And this is one of the main reasons why I decided to get a cutting mat and quilting rulers, because oh my god, does this make things faster. And then I just have to do that again for the other side. And here we are. Next up, I need to cut some interfacing. Now I'm going to be using some fusible buckram because I got some to make tote bags out of and then did not make the tote bags, but you could also just use an extra piece of felt on the inside as interfacing as well. Just like that, I have this cut out, and now since this is a fusible buckram, you can kind of see, it's hard to see, but there's a little bit of a shininess on this side that you don't see on this side that tells me this is the glue side. I'm going to need to get my iron out so I can fuse it to my outside piece. Now, I usually don't care too much about the difference versus pressing, where you push down, lift, and then move down, lift, versus ironing, where you just move the iron around while staying in contact with the fabric. But when you're fusing something to another piece of fabric, pressing, where you lift and push straight down, lift and push straight down, is in fact very important, because otherwise this can start shifting around all over the place. So I'm first going to press this outside fabric so that it's nice and crisp. And then I'm going to double check which side's fusible. If you're not sure, get a pressing cloth. So that's just like an extra piece of fabric that you can put in between these to protect your iron. And now I'm going to push down and just leave that for a while it fuses to let the heat really penetrate. And when you're done, your nice flimsy piece of quilting cotton should now be a lot stiffer. Now, some fusibles are better than others, and this one is not really staying down very well, so let's just hurry up and get this sewn together so that it has to stay down. Now, on this needle book, I had made an attempt to have some sort of closure with like elastic that can wrap around the button. It didn't turn out very well because this elastic was sewn into here and then it just came out. On this needle book, I made no such attempt and it works perfectly fine. So I'm not even going to attempt to make a closure for this one. So I'm just going to take this fabric. You'll see the right side is here. On the wrong side, I have the buckram fused to it, and I'm going to take my inside fabric. I'm going to place these guys right sides together so that's pretty sides touching, and I'm going to sew all the way around the edges, but I have to leave a little bit of a gap for turning. When I leave this gap, I don't want it to be in a corner because otherwise that's going to make it much more difficult to do my top stitching around the edges to make sure everything's closed afterwards, I'm going to leave the gap on the very long, flat, boring part of this. So basically between, let's say, right here and right here is where I shall leave the gap in order to be able to turn it inside out. Over at the sewing machine, what this means I have to do is I have to start at this mark. I cannot start at the end, otherwise I will stitch over the gap. I have to start over here. So I'm going to put my presser foot down right by that mark and make sure you have your 1/2 inch seam allowance. If you're a little bit off, it's fine. If your needle book is a little bit smaller, bigger, not the end of the world. I am, to be honest, guesstimating my seam allowances right now because my needle plate has no numbers. I'm going to do my back stitch and just keep going all the way around. And when I get to the corner, I'm going to put my needle down, lift my presser foot, and pivot it. If it's not far enough, I can unpivot and do another stitch. Or if it is good, I can just keep going. Once I get close to the end, I can also use my hand wheel on the side in order to make sure I don't go too far instead of just using my presser foot. Or, sorry, your foot pedal. And now I'm getting close to my mark again. I'm going to back stitch and then take it out. And now I have this stitched all the way around the edges except for this part right here where I'm going to use to turn. And I have to clip these corners because when I turn this inside out, all of this seam allowance is going to get shoved into that little corner, and that doesn't work very well. That's a lot of fabric to allow that corner to be a corner. So I'm just going to take my scissors. I'm going to chop that corner off. Make sure you don't cut the stitches by accident. And what this does is when I fold each corner in now, you'll see that fits much better. Now that I have all the corners flipped, I'm going to go to this area and I'm going to try to turn everything inside out. Now, as I'm sure you can see, this is just kind of struggle city. The bigger of a hole you leave, the easier it is to turn inside out, but the more annoying it is to close at the end. So it's kind of a trade-off between sizes. Once you get closer to finishing it though, you can take like a stick or something and use it to help you poke out those corners, but you have to be careful it's not too sharp, because if it's too sharp, you're going to just poke a hole in your fabric and that is not good. All right, now you can see I have a rather wrinkled and scruffy looking beginning to my needle book. So I'm just gonna bring my wool pressing mat back over and iron this flat. Okay, next up what I'm going to do, there's still a little gappy opening here. I'm going to take this back over to the iron and I'm going to stitch all the way around the outside edges. Now my seam allowance the first time I stitched was 1/2 inch wide, which means there's 1/2 inch of seam allowance inside here. So when I stitch my second time top stitching around the edges, I have to make sure it's less than 1/2 inch wide so that when I stitch over this, it stitches down the seam allowances and makes it so that, yeah, they do split apart a little bit, but there are no raw edges peeking through. Alrighty, so now that she has been properly top stitched, I'm going to fold her in half back over here at my iron, and I'm actually going to press her in half because the next step, we got to cut and sew on some felt, and usually you just sew it right along the middle, and folding something in half and then just pressing it so that there's a crease is a great way to find the middle. Now, when you cut your felt for this, you want your felt to be slightly smaller than the edges of your actual needle book so that everything gets contained nicely within. And I've decided to be incredibly lazy. Instead of using my cutting mat, I'm just going to line up the bottom of my felt with the edge here. This goes a little bit off the edge, but remember, we have to make it slightly smaller anyways. And I'm just going to take a piece of, I think this is tailor's wax, and just draw around the edges. And since we're being lazy, and by we I mean me, I'm going to just get some scissors, and you'll notice I'm cutting out on the inside of this line. so that I can make sure it is slightly smaller than my actual needle book. And then just trim this edge off. Voila. Let's see, does it fit? Yes, it fits. Ignore the dog hair on the sides. Oh, I might want to trim this edge just a smidge smaller. Like that. And look at that, it's perfect. Now I'm going to use this piece of felt in order to cut out the other pages in my needle book. You can have as many pages in your needle book as you'd like, but I found 4 pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, aka 2 pieces of felt is a good size. So I'm just going to cut out a second piece. Okay, now that I have that cut, it's in my book, I am literally just going to do a straight stitch straight down the middle. And congratulations, that's literally it. You've made a needle book, and now you can place all of your needles, your sewing needles, or your machine needles on the inside of the book, and you can take this and travel and take it with you places without worrying about it stabbing you. As you just saw, needle books are very easy to make, and they are an absolute great beginner project. And one of my favorite things about needle books, pincushions, and other projects like it is that they're useful. You can use them in your sewing. You are making sewing tools so that you can keep sewing. Wait, so you're sewing tools that allow you to keep sewing and sew easier. So this is a great beginner project if you're looking for something just to get started in. If you like this video and enjoy my content, I'd really appreciate it if you were also to check out my Instagram. Since I have Instagram, it also automatically uploads my stuff onto Facebook as well, and I also have a Ko-fi account. All of that is, I think, linked within my YouTube bio. I tried doing so. Please let me know if it doesn't work. If you try this project out, you should totally show me. Post it on your profile and tag me so that I can see it, or, I don't know, leave a comment. I hope you had fun. Happy sewing. I'll see you at the next project.